Hello my crafty friends. Normally I add a simple slip pocket to most of my bags because they are very quick and easy to make and super handy. But lately I've been loving a pleated patch pocket. They provide a little bit more space inside, which makes them even more practical. In my last video, I showed you how to create a custom pocket template, and today we are bringing it to life. I'll walk you through each step of sewing this type of pocket so you can easily add it to your bags. So, if you are ready, let's get started. To make your pocket, you will need to cut 2 rectangles based on the template you created in the previous tutorial. If you want to add your pocket on the exterior portion of your bag, instead of cutting it twice from the lining, you will need to cut it once from external fabric and then once from your lining fabric. But since I'm adding my pocket inside my bag, I've cut my pieces both from lining fabric. To begin, take one of your pocket pieces. In the example where you are adding your pocket on the exterior of your bag, take the external pocket piece. Then take your template and make sure to mark all your midpoints and notches on the right side of the fabric. So you want to use a removable pen, chalk, or any other marking tool that you can easily clean, because we are going to mark the entire line. I'm going to take my ruler now and simply draw those 2 lines on each side of my pocket. Here we go, just like that. Now you can take your other pocket piece and place it on top. So right sides are facing each other. Line it up on all sides and then clip those 2 pieces together. Here we go. Next, we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew the seams along all 4 sides. However, we need to leave an opening somewhere along the bottom edge so later we can turn our pocket right side out. So I'm just going to mark a couple of notches so I don't forget to stop. And what I like to do is to also draw my seam allowance at the corners, just so I know exactly when I need to pivot my fabric. So I would do that along each corner. It might be easier to do that before you clip those 2 pieces together. What I found very helpful in creating nice and sharp corners is to, instead of sewing the entire seam and then pivoting my fabric at the corner and then continue sewing the next edge, I like to stop about 1 or 2 stitches before I get to the corner and pivot my fabric and sew my seam, my corner diagonally like this. So instead of sewing it up to this corner and then pivoting, I would sew the seam to this point, then pivot my fabric, sew 1 or 2 stitches depending on the stitch length, and then carry on sewing my seam. And I would do that along every single corner. Once you've got your seam stitched and you left an opening along the bottom edge, you can trim the seam allowance to reduce the bulk. So I like to trim the seam allowance at the corners quite a bit. So depending on what type of fabric you are using, you may need to leave a little bit longer seam allowance if your fabric has a tendency to fraying. But since I'm using waterproof canvas, I can trim it quite close to the stitching line. Here we go. You want to leave seam allowance as it is along the bottom opening, because it's going to be easier later on to fold those edges. So once you are ready, you can turn the pocket right side out using that opening. If you have a corner shaper, chopsticks, or something similar, you can use those tools to poke and push those corners out. When you are ready, take your pocket to the pressing station and press your seams nice and flat. So what I like to do is to start where the opening is and roll my fabric between my fingers to bring the stitching line to the top. And then I can take my iron and press the seam nice and flat. If you cannot use iron, if you cannot press your fabric, you can use something like seam roller to flatten that seam, or maybe use clips and hold it a little bit just to make sure your seams are flat and you are ready for the next step. Since I can press my fabric, I'm going to do just that. When you get to the bottom where you have the opening, fold under your seam allowance. And what I like to do is to keep my fabric taut and then press it flat. This way, I know I can create very nice and straight edge. Again, if you cannot press your fabric, you can use double-sided tape and just stick the seam allowance under just to keep it in place. Now take your pocket to the sewing machine and top stitch along the top edge. Now we're going to fold our pocket along the notch or line number 1. So if you look at your template, you should have notch 1, notch 2, and again notch 1, notch 2. We're going to fold our pocket along the line that is further from the edge. So that's the second line that is marked. So you're going to fold your pocket wrong sides together, just like that. If you can, press it with your iron. Otherwise, you can use clips to hold everything in place. And then you're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. So again, I'm folding it along that line or along those 2 notches if you didn't draw the line. Here we go. So this is what it should look like. Next, you can take this to the machine and simply top stitch your pocket along those 2 folded edges about 2-3 millimeters from the edge. So next what you want to do is to bring those 2 folded edges towards the first line or towards the notch number 2. So what I like to do is to flip my pocket like this and then grab this folded edge and bring it down and line it up with the other notch. Again, if you can press your fabric, then press it. If you cannot press your fabric or your fabric is pretty stubborn, you can use clips to just hold it in place. Here we go. And then you're going to do that on the other side as well. So bring the folded edge towards the notch and then press it flat. This is optional, but if you want, you can also top stitch the other fold. So the fold that we just created underneath, if you want, you can take this to the machine and again top stitch just to hold the pleat in place, just like we've done on the top. Now you can take your main panel where you want to add your pocket. So I have my front lining piece here. Then place your pocket on top. Right sides are facing up. As you can see, I've already marked where I want to place my pocket, and I've marked the center of my main panel so I can line up my pocket in the center, just like that. So make sure to line it up, then take pins and pin your pocket to your fabric. If you cannot pin your fabric, then you could try using something like masking tape just to hold the pocket in place, or maybe try using double-sided tape. So I'm just going to take my time and pin my pocket. Here we go. When you are ready, you can take this to the machine and then top stitch the sides and the bottom edge to anchor the pocket onto your fabric. This is optional, but you can also stitch a little triangle along the top corners just to anchor your pocket in place, or install a couple of rivets here. If you have to, give your pocket a final press, otherwise you've made your very own pleated patch pocket. Well done! So let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this tutorial, if you want to try this pocket, or if you want to try any other pockets. I'm always open to suggestions. Otherwise, I see you in the next video. See you next time. Stay crafty, friends. Bye!